Patients. I want to welcome you again to the second of our lectures on Engaging China, which are sponsored by the Lundquist College of Business and also the Center for Asian Pacific Studies and the Office of the President. A reminder for those who are following the schedule, we will be taking a 2-week hiatus. We'll be returning on May the 5th for our next discussion, which will also hopefully occur in this larger venue, so we encourage you to bring a friend for the next one as well. For those who are interested, just a short plug for an event going on here at the Business School next week, which is the 10th anniversary of the Women in Sports Business Symposium, sponsored by the Warsaw Center. We'll have 14 of the leading female sports executives from around the country descending on our campus for an opportunity to discuss issues related to not only women's sports, but also women working in the sports industry. And we're happy to be hosting that both Thursday night, the 27th, with Leanne Daly, the former head of marketing for ESPN, and then during the morning hours of the 28th, which will all be housed here at the Business School. It's my pleasure now to introduce our second speaker in our Engaging China series. It's Ina Asim from here at the University of Oregon, where she is an associate professor in pre-modern Chinese history, and I'm told a specialty in material culture. She joined the University of Oregon in 2002, and we're very pleased to have her here. As you can see by the title of her talk today, Let the Best Win, Ritual, Performance, and Competition in Chinese History. My pleasure again to introduce Ina Asim.
Here. When Professor Haynes and Laurie O'Halloran from the Center of Asian Pacific Studies asked me whether I would address a few questions of history to inform some of the students of marketing who are planning to go to China, I was actually quite impressed that they are interested in preparing themselves so well and take care to get some background information before they set out. In this lecture, I would like to pick up where Professor Durant left us last week and tell you about 3 aspects of Chinese history that left an imprint on Chinese society visible today: ritual, performance, and competition. All 3 aspects of these social practices are linked with one another, and all 3, as we will see, have a visible presence in contemporary China. First of all, ritual. I apologize for this funny layout of this slide. I'm experimenting with several Chinese character programs, and this is not the most beautiful one, which it distorts the encoding a little bit. While in the Western context, rituals are defined as established forms for ceremonial acts or actions, in Chinese, li, the character for ritual, can be translated as propriety, good manners, politeness, ceremony, worship, can also express showing respect, for instance, by giving face to one's guest, reverence, and appropriate protocol. Rituals could be used to conform or overcome social distinctions and to create sentiments of solidarity and unity. Since they represented concepts of cosmic and social order, they defined cultural identity. Cosmic order, very briefly, the emperor, called the Son of Heaven, communicates to heaven and to man, to his subjects. In ancient China, correct performance of Li was seen as a measure to correct the behavior of the people, as well as a means to regulate and pacify the state. Instrumental in reforming conduct and in developing a sentiment of duty in the individual, Li helped to provide for a smooth functioning of society on all levels. This is, of course, the ideal world we're talking about. When Li was missing, vulgarity could take over. And this was a situation that was to be avoided under all circumstances. In traditional China, rituals were important in the public and in the private sphere. The public sphere was ruled by state rituals, though most of these state rituals were not visible to the commoner, since there was a taboo of participation for most people. In the state rituals, concepts of cosmic and social order were expressed, concepts thus that came to reproduce sets of cultural values, define correct moral behavior, define cultural identity, and give authority and legitimacy to the state. Rituals were seen as a regulatory force for all members of society. The self-cultivation required to perform Li properly was supposed to keep the powerful from arrogance and the commoners from showing disrespect. To speak with Confucius, respect without Li is tiresome. Caution without Li is timidity. Boldness without Li is insubordination, and straightforwardness without Li is rudeness. The symbolic content of rituals became one of continuity in Confucian liturgy. The earliest written codes of rituals are three ancient and thus authoritative classics: the Rites of Zhou, the classic on etiquette and ritual, and Professor Durand mentioned these two in his talk, and the Record of Rituals, in which we find interpretations of rituals as they were supposed to be followed by the imperial relatives, ministers, and the high-ranking officials. Ritual experts played the role of clerics in the Chinese state. These experts developed patterns of values in high culture, in the high culture of the intellectuals, just as in the official culture. Since they were not witnessed by a larger public and subject to interpretation over time, rituals were mysterious and could be controversial, especially when redefined and parts of rituals as observed in Buddhism or in Taoism were thought that to be integrated into state ritual. Nevertheless, their basic social function was undisputed. Rituals served to root man in family, state, and cosmos, and helped to tame extreme emotions, such as deep mourning, wrath, etc. While court ritual was not codified and performed privately by the emperor and his relatives, state ritual was codified and became emblematic of its legitimacy for the dynasty. Ritual and politics were intertwined in about 100 liturgies, followed in sacrifices to heaven, sacrifices to the ancestors, audiences with officials, audiences with foreign envoys, the rites of passage, throne accession, the rituals performed at funerals, rituals performed after a bad harvest, and rituals performed on the occasion of war rehearsals in which the value of constraint was practiced by the emperor, who was reminded of possible consequences of his actions and also of his grace and ability to give face to the event, to the enemy. So this is an important part, actually. If we think the emperor is so powerful, he can basically decide whatever he wants to do with his enemy. No, stop, this is not possible, because in the ideal world of the ritual sets, he is actually asked to consider how he deals with an enemy who is a prisoner of war or used to be his equal, maybe, in contending states. And if we look at rituals, you will tell me, well, state rituals are not in any way practiced today, of course, because we are not in imperial China anymore. But I just wanted to remind you that recreating certain aspects of history comes along with certain rituals. And to this very day, Confucius' birthday is celebrated in Qufu, in his hometown. It is also celebrated, in Taipei. And it's not just a touristy event, but there are quite a few people who attend the ceremony. Schools bring their students to attend and to relate to them what the role of Confucius was in Chinese history. And finally, when we get to family rituals now, I just wanted to show you the altar, the family altar of the Kong clan, which is now in the 76th generation. Family rituals comprised rituals performed at funerals, weddings, initiation rites such as cappings for young men or pinnings for young women, and offerings of food and drink to honor the ancestors. Ancestral rites were based on the assumption of a mutual dependence of the living and the dead. Liturgies for these ceremonies were first published in a standardized version in the 13th century, compiled by the philosopher Zhu Xi. They soon became the reference work for most questions of etiquette. And you will again say, oh, this is in the 13th century. What kind of relevance does this have today? We'll see. Family rituals reproduce social distinctions, such as class and gender distinctions, and they determined decorum and manners, as well as one's expression in appropriate language. They regulated kinship relations, and in some ways, the transmitted standards of proper behavior still regulate family life today. So these are many words about rituals, but to quote David, how can we make a buck out of this? I don't know. But I do know that the traditional background of rituals helps us to read the grammar of relationships. Relationships between individuals and relationships between states to this very day. It is remarkable when the former president, Jiang Zemin, under whose political guidance the decision about the construction of the Three Gorges Dam was begun, visits the tomb of the ancient sage king, Da Yu, the Great Yu, and thus aligns himself with the legendary emperor who is known by every child in China as the one who tamed the waves and thus gave unity to the territory that came to be China. This is the entrance to the tomb, and this is the modern statue of Da Yu. Of course, it's interesting that a legendary emperor has a tomb. And to be in line properly, ritually, here's Jiang Zemin in front of the stele commemorating Da Yu. Does Jiang Zemin portray himself as a modern sage king? This seems slightly immodest, but the non-negotiable message we get is that this political legacy is in line with the process of the creation of China by the mythical tamer of the waves. So step 2, Three Gorges Dam, if it works fine, will provide us in China with electricity, well, I actually don't know for how long, but in enormous dimensions. Example 2. When President Hu Jintao visits the United States, it is observed in China with keen eyes which line of protocol is followed here. Does the President of the United States honor the President of China with a state dinner? Or does he receive his counterpart for a business lunch? On which level does he give face to his guest? To read the protocol means to assess the level of distance or closeness, the level of acceptance or friendship, or rivalry, or condescendence even, harbored for the guest. Mistakes in protocol, the modern form of state ritual, will backfire. Part 2, performance. Staging rituals through monumental space. I want to show you briefly the Forbidden City that you probably all know, and then show you a monument that I mentioned last week very briefly, that I think is, even if some people think it's polit-kitsch, it's very interesting to see and tells us that history matters in China. And finally, the performance that the Chinese demand of themselves also applies to the international business world that competes for orders, to put it very broadly, in China. As the center of the realm, the court in the capital was an exemplary space where transformatory forces of ritual were conceptualized as shaping the entire country. the center of political power of the Middle Kingdom was located in the capital, and the Forbidden City with the living and working quarters of the emperor was the ritual and political center of the capital and of China as a whole. So, without setting a foot outside of the gates of the Forbidden City, the emperor could reach every corner of the realm by performing rituals within the Forbidden City. The Forbidden City is laid out on a north-south axis, and the ritual space taken up is divided in two large sectors, the inner and the outer court. And this is not, unfortunately I forgot my laser pointer, but the outer court reaches to beyond the gate and the three halls, beyond the gate and the three halls in the center. So the back part with the last two large halls and lots of buildings in the wings to the left and the right is the inner court. The outer court contains 5 important halls, 3 aligned in the center of the court, and these 3 halls were all halls in which ritual ceremonies related to the state were planned. In the middle hall, there were wedding banquets for the princesses, audiences, and the palace examiner. And then there are 2 side halls next to aside from the central hall, which were devoted to the civil and military element in the administration. In the inner court, I think I have a map even. Oh, this is better. The part in the very north were the living quarters of the emperor and the clan. And there were also, I don't want to go into the details of all the halls because, as you can already sense, I want to show you this other monument just as a reminder for the ritual layout of the space. This was the area where the emperor had his place for meditation, where temples were present, were built for the imperial clan for prayer, and where the general family life took place. The term Forbidden City is related to the term Hidden Red District, a location in heaven of which the polar star is the center. Just as the polar star rules over heaven, the Chinese emperor ruled over the world. According to traditional beliefs, the Hidden Red District was lined by star constellations like a wall and crisscrossed by other star constellations which mirrored the imperial administration on Earth. Qin Shi Huangdi, the first emperor, who, as you remember, was so deeply admired by Mao Zedong, was the first Chinese ruler who attempted to build his palace in the capital Xianyang in accordance with the star constellation above him. In accordance with the ritual function of the emperor as the son of heaven, who was supposed to rule over the people in accordance with the will of heaven, he was given the mandate of heaven to rule, and he could lose this mandate if his rule became morally imbalanced. Every imperial capital fulfilled the function as the ritual center of the empire, the location of communication between heaven, the son of heaven, and his subjects. It is therefore significant that Mao Zedong chose to proclaim the People's Republic of China from the Gate of Heavenly Peace, the gate that separates the imperial city from the southern part of the capital. That Mao's portrait to this very day adorns the entrance to the imperial city expresses the claim of the new rulers to have opened the Forbidden District and made it accessible for the people. Now, the new monument. The Millennium Altar. The Chinese website of this monument calls it altar. The English translation, also done by the city government, calls it Millennium Monument. Altar has a different connotation and reminds us much more of what happens in the imperial city, in the Forbidden City. The symbolic, if not ritual use of space in Beijing, which is of course still the center of power in China, continues today. In the preparation of the festivities celebrating the new millennium, the Chinese government decided to create a monument in the capital that was supposed to symbolize China's ascent to a leading position in the world. The monument, called Millennium Altar, summarizes China's long history, points out China's contributions in the history of science and technology, emphasizes China's territorial new integrity after the return of Hong Kong and Macau, and attempts to manifest the integration of the national minorities in the Chinese state. Let's take a short walk here. So where is it located? Here is the Forbidden City. And you see it's only compared to the Forbidden City, and I don't want to drive this comparison too far, is the space for the Millennium Altar or Monument. Much smaller, but also on a north-south axis. And what is interesting is when we elongate the axis of the monument a little further to the south, which is intended, we end up at the new Beijing Western train station. Train station. What does that have to do with ritual? Well, this is the train station where the train from Hong Kong, Beijing, Hong Kong, starts and ends. So, as you will see in a moment, when you stand on top of the monument, you look towards the train station leading to Hong Kong. And if you just think about this a little further, more abstract, you look all the way to the south to Hong Kong, newly integrated. Also interesting is that in the north you have a park. The park is actually rather huge, quite interestingly used. A lot of the space is used for rock concerts, and the apartment buildings around this park are almost as expensive as the ones in New York around Central Park. This is what it looks like in the model. You get off the subway here, enter this space, and first see the plaza of the Holy Fire. Holy Fire. Holy Fire that always burns, and is said to have lit in Zhoukoudian. Zhoukoudian, the location where the bones of the Peking man were found. Now, Chinese history goes back that far. In the Neolithic, can we already talk about China? I don't know. Nevertheless, it doesn't really matter. So what you then do is you take a walk towards this big monument at the end. And the walkway is Chinese history. This little canal was originally filled with bronze plates and then covered with water. And after a while, the engineers found out that bronze and water in the long run don't really work very well together. So they removed the bronze and inscribed the granite that is underneath with the same dates of Chinese history that were on the plates before. So it's not the bronze corridor anymore, as it is still called on the website. But what you do is you take a walk along Chinese history all the way from the Neolithic to today. And as you walk, you can give, of course, your kids a test, what was in the beginning of the Ming, or who was Sima Qian, etc. Now, just to give you, before we get into the monument, the monument at the back is a sundial, and it moves, of course. So the gnomon here is in the neutral is depicted in the neutral position. Very interesting, because the time measure of entire Chinese history and then the time measure of every hour of what happens today is a concept that I find quite unique. I have never seen a monument dedicated to history by any state. Maybe I just don't know enough. Right and left part of this ascending structure are huge cinemas and exhibition halls. So modern art exhibition, all around sound cinemas, big spaces for meetings are hidden underneath here. And then below the gnomon you could also sit. So in the center there's space for a stage. You can have a concert outdoors. And the park behind all of this, again, also is used for pop concerts. Let's go inside. Oh, yeah, I didn't want you to miss this. So when you stand on top of the platform with the gnomon, you look to the western train station. And here again is the Plaza of the Holy Fire. And around the central structure above, around the revolving sundial, there are emblems of all 56 Chinese minorities. These emblems, there was a competition for artists, and the artists of the minorities were asked to produce an emblem that symbolizes their cultural achievements. And so all of these minorities are integrated in this monument. Now when we go inside of the rotating part of the building, we find Chinese history. Again, it starts in the Neolithic, and very quickly we come to the Sage Kings, and I will take you in very, very large steps through this monument. So the first person, of course, is number 21. That's the Great Yu. We have met him already. And of course, he's remembered in this fresco for taming the floods. He's the one who unified China territorially. Then, of course, you have cultural heroes such as Confucius, who could leave him out of this. And Qian Shi Huangdi, the unifier, political unifier of China, the first emperor. Quite interesting. Is he flying to immortality? Maybe. At least he has achieved something. And here is Sima Qian writing the Shiji. The philosopher Zhu Xi, who wrote up the family rituals and more books on Confucianism to give a perspective of moral and ethics to the Chinese population. And even foreigners are included. So here's Zheng He, Admiral Zheng He, who led the expeditions to in the Ming Dynasty all the way to the African coast. And Matteo Ricci, with his astronomical, with his, now I like the term, you know what I mean. The stargazer, the man who was much more appreciated for being able to create a decent and reliable calendar than for his Christian belief. And then we make a big, big jump. Of course, the proclamation of the People's Republic of China has to be in here, and all the relevant officials. Sun Yat-sen, as the father of the nation, sits in front of his doctrine. Deng Xiaoping, the four modernizations, the return of Macau and Hong Kong are shown in these emblems above. And finally, China takes off into the space age. There is no space left then, because as you see, this is where we started out. So this is recorded until the year 2000. Though this monument may not be considered a space with ritual function as the Forbidden City, it definitely is a space of performance. The past is celebrated and linked to the future. A space of historical projection and modern entertainment has been created, dedicated to the young, to the present and the future generations. With enormous film theaters, as I said, and a large space for open-air concerts, it has become a symbol of China taking its position in the future. Now, the last outlook, expectations of excellence, the Beijing Olympics. This looks all very playful. This is one of the logos that are already circulating. There's a set of 7 or 8 logos. Very playful, a child playing with the Olympic rings here, and very endearing. What was not so endearing was the competition, the worldwide competition for the new structures of the Olympic stadium and the competition halls. So what we have here are the water cube, so-called water cube, the swimming hall, the hall for the swimming competition, and the national stadium. The water cube is quite interesting because Australian company has won the competition here, and they have created something. This is what it looks like from the inside. That meets the very, very strict standards that China gave out for these buildings for sustainability. So apparently the new material that they use to create the walls or create the outside skeleton of the building is a type of newly developed Teflon. So it's called the bubble structure. Looks very funny, reminds us of foam, but it's actually mathematically, it's a mathematical, how do you say that, transformation of what happens with water bubbles. And apparently the temperature of the air is used to heat up the room, heat up the water, and also cool the room if it gets hot outside. How this exactly works, it's a kind of osmosis, but I'm not an engineer. I'll be happy to provide you with the background information to get to this architect. So there's another endearing logo. You will find lots of those, but I just included this to show you that the international competition that the Chinese engage in for these new structures is severe. And this thing here, everybody's waiting for it to be completed, is also set up in the trend of modernization of Beijing and is supposed to be finished actually even before the Olympics start. It's the new building of the Chinese television station #1 and called by the Beijingers the Twisted Donut, also by an architecture of I think this is a cooperation. What it shows us is that Beijing is opening up, that space is used in very new ways. It's highly disputed in China, but the government is engaging in an international competition for these buildings to show a new face of China to the world. Finally, competition. Most important point in terms of competition, historically and today, is education. Chinese society has been and is today highly competitive. The most striking manifestation of competition remain the civil service examinations that were used to recruit officials for service to the state. Since the 10th century, these examinations shaped the lives of millions of men striving for excellence in education to gain one of the promising positions in the state administration. Passing the exams was a necessity to secure membership in the social elite. The competition in the run for office at times made the testing sites into cultural prisons, I'm quoting Benjamin Ellman, and the examination machinery dominated the life of those involved to such an extent that the examination life like death and taxes, Elman's words, became one of the fixtures of elite society and popular culture. In the year 1500, China had a population of about 65 million people and 30,000 candidates for the Jinshi degree, the degree that sometimes is equaled with a doctorate. By 1700, the population had more than doubled, about 150 million people, and there were about 500,000 candidates for the exams. Just very briefly, what happened if you wanted to take the exam? Homeschooling is, of course, not the appropriate expression. It's not to be compared with American homeschooling. It's a school run by a family or a clan where the clan members sent their youngsters and they had to take a test before they could continue. Then you had exams on the county or prefecture level, and once you made this step, you were licensed, you could become a county, prefecture, town, school student, depending on the level. Then you could take another qualifying exam, given every 3 years, a provincial exam, also given every 3 years, the metropolitan exam, given every 3 years, and finally the palace exam with the Jinshi degree, and you could, if you passed that as the very first person, become a Zhuangyuan. And in the Qing dynasty, there was then also another exam, the court placement exam for the Hanlin Academy, the highest level of, the highest institution of learning. And once you had run through the stages 1 to 7, you were eligible for appointment by rank on several levels. To give you an idea why the exams were called a machinery, I want to tell you what an exam candidate had to produce in an exam on the provincial level in the Ming Dynasty, 1368 to 1644. One essay on a topic from one of the 5 classics in 500 characters. 5 classics in 4 books are the classics that you had learned by heart, of course. One essay on a topic from one of the 4 books in 300 characters, please. A discourse on a text from the classic of filial piety in 500 characters. Writings in correct document style using classical quotations, and the answer to practical questions on public policy in 1,000 characters. So when you were done with that, you had to wait for 10 days. If you did a good job, then you were tested in horsemanship, archery, calligraphy, mathematics, and penal law. Now we know the concept of the exams. What were the procedures for the participants? 1 week prior to the exam, the candidate would arrive, preferably with a servant, and register his name. At registration, he had to present his county credentials, the documentation of his family background, his social status, no butcher and no monk could participate, and a statement that he was not violating the mourning period for a parent. So if your mother had died or your father had died a year before the exam, you had to wait another period until the next exam was given, because the mourning period lasted for 3 years. And by no means could you violate this ritual demand. After registration, the candidate would buy paper and brushes, have the paper approved with a seal to make sure that he didn't slip in any other little papers that would later help him, buy food provisions, toilet facilities, and candles. Very dangerous. Very often there were fires in these precincts. When entering the exam compound to take the 3-day-long exam, all candidates were body searched, and there are lots of remarks in personal notes about how rough these people were who searched you, and the provisions and the clothing and everything else was examined too. In Nanjing, 7,500 candidates participated in the exam in 1630, which means that a total of 12,000, between 12,000 and 15,000 persons were present in the examination precinct. So how come, if we only have 7,500 people participating in the exam? Well, there were presiding examiners, education commissioners, proctors, examiners, associate examiners, printers, clerks, collectors, sealers, copyists, proofreaders, suppliers, guards, gatekeepers, and inspectors. All of these people were taking care that the exam was properly arranged and nobody cheated to, well, we'll see whether this worked. Why were there copyists and sealers, etc., etc.? Because the exam papers that you handed in were copied. Your name was exchanged for a number to guarantee anonymity. And then, of course, somebody would read whether the copyist didn't make a mistake and whether this was actually your paper, and so on. A whole procedure of checking that this went straight. This is what it looked like in Nanjing. The area in the center was the area for the examiners, and all these little rectangulars were examination cells to be housed by the poor candidate for 3 days. The examination cells, unfortunately, I have a slide of this and I didn't find it anymore, are open in the front and closed in the back and at the sides, and are not larger than this size of the desk and a half. So rain or shine, you had to sit in there. If the wind blows and takes away your examination papers, too bad, that was it. If the rain comes and messes up what you have written in proper ink, too bad. Lots of personal records, poems of sadness about the circumstance. Because remember, you had to wait 3 years until you could do it again. And who knows if the examiner this time was in favor of what you have been what you had written. Well, it may not happen again. So, chances lost. So once you were assigned a space in one of these little cells, usually all these rows had characters. So this is the character for autumn. You were given autumn row, number 27. You made your way in there, set up your papers and all the stuff you brought with you, and then you had to pay attention that the person who checked regularly and walked back and forth in front of you, because of course everything was open, didn't see you when you were looking up prepared material. Maybe, of course, no ritual perfect person would bring in anything like this. Or not. This is a cheating shirt. So somebody was really diligent and copied all the classics on the shirt, and then, of course, I don't know how this works. If you have these answer to question 20 is somewhere in the back. Where is the person who controls me right now? How do I take this off to see the back of the shirt? I don't know, but this is what we have. So cheating happened. What could you do? You could also sit in for somebody else. That's what happened. Or once the questions were announced, people would write outside and then bribe one of these people who were controlling to bring in the answer, etc. So there were ways found to cheat. The exams occupied the brains of the people extensively. This is a young man who's preparing for the exam at home. Actually, we know he was rather wealthy. He had a live-in tutor. The tutor just went away for a moment, and soon, what happens? The candidate falls asleep. And in his dream about the exam, the upcoming exam, what does he see? He sees a man coming with 3 heads to him. Startled to death, he tells his tutor, what is going to happen to me? There was a man in the dream who brought me 3 heads. Actually, this turns out to be quite positive. You won't believe it, because in 1435, age 21, this young man, Shang Lu, passes as the best candidate in the provincial exams of Zhejiang province. 10 years later, he becomes the best graduate of the metropolitan exam. And in 1445, he finally passes the palace exam as the optimist. So in this lucky case, the three heads actually symbolize 3 stages of success. Today, competition for a university education is stronger than ever. The entrance exams last 3 days, not in such cells though. In the year 2000, 3.9 million young people took the exam, twice as many as college places were available across China. The competition is hard, for some, too much to bear. And suicides are not uncommon results of the extreme pressure. Cheating is also not out of the way. During Black July, that's how the exam month is called. In Guangdong's Dianbei County, students pay teachers to have answers transmitted to their pages and obtain guaranteed qualifying scores. Price, $361. Only the best succeed in social mobility and participate in the enormous economic growth of the present. This is the first generation of the one-child policy that matures to exam age. For the families, success in the exam is the ultimate goal to get their children into college and to a job with good salary. This is especially important since many people rely on the support of their child in retirement, because most older people have only a very limited retirement income. How do we make a buck of this? I do not have a recipe for you, but I know that we cannot behave as if we are setting the pace or making the rules in our cooperation and competition with China. China has already dominated economic key markets and dictates in multiple ways how the game is played. While engaging in China, and since history does matter to the Chinese, it does not harm to know a little bit of the underlying concepts of ritual and performance that determine China's society and still guide its economic competition with us today. Thank you. Maybe somebody has a question? Yes, please. When was it reconstructed? In the end of the 80s, but I can't tell you which year it was. 86, 87? I would have to look it up. In Shaoxing. Yes.
The Millennium Altar, those different plaques that represent the minorities, did you say they're actually done by minority artists? And how did they go about finding and facilitating that?
Apparently, the Chinese government started a competition for this and asked artists to send in their ideas for these symbols or these icons, and then they had a committee that decided which of the icons were selected for this project.
So it was only open to people of the minority groups?
Yes, yeah. Each emblem was supposed to be designed by a person of that very minority. The Millennium Altar and the Tiantan, because it's Tan? That's a very good question. Tiantan and Ditan, the altar of heaven and the altar of earth, which were, of course, important ritual spaces that the emperor visited for performing rituals, share the denomination, the character Tan, the name altar. I don't know why. Well, I don't think it's the location. I think it has a meaning because they selected this very character to denominate the space. I don't think so. I don't think so because I think that the intention was to create something new, to create the next step, to get away from the previous set of rituals and create a perspective for the Chinese population being based on history, but going forward into a future with new challenges. And I would see the Tiantan and Ditan and the Imperial City as the basis that should not be forgotten. And yeah, it's a very good question. Again, what do you think? Why is Han appropriate for a monument dedicated to history?
I'm glad that it is.
Yeah, I found it very interesting because it moves this monument into a ritual sphere, but to draw a comparison with the sacrificial space of sacrifices to the earth and offerings to heaven is maybe intended, but maybe over the top. I don't know. I can't answer your question.
Now comes between Ren and people, so it could be in between the Tian and the Qi. But then it's overcoming the past.
That's a very good idea. That's excellent. Yeah, maybe. Yeah, why not? Tiandi Ren is the structure. Yes.
What do Chinese students pay for their education? They pass their entrance examinations. Do students pay for the university education?
Oh yes, they do. It's extremely expensive, but I don't know what it costs to take the exam. I just found the number for the cheating, and I assume that also differs from locality to locality. There is, but minimally. And I can't give you numbers, unfortunately. I would have to look this up. Again, do you know financial support for students getting into college? How much can they hope for, or what is the scale, approximate scale?
I think you pay very little for registering for the examination.
Yeah.
But for financial support after they enter the colleges, it's very poor and generous.
Yeah, it's the registration itself is just a fee, administrative fee, but the support is hard to get. There's lots of competition for scholarships, first of all, and then scholarships are not abundant. But again, I'm sorry, numbers I would have to look up as well.
25 years ago, when the Japanese economy was going into this boom mode, and it was sort of on the minds of Americans, and people like Ezra Vogel began to look very self-consciously at Japan, actually find lessons from America, et cetera. Japanese business people also were, it doesn't surprise me that leadership sees history as symbolic and uses it very self-consciously, but I guess I wonder how far down does that reach? And the example that I have from Japan's more recent history is of businessmen who quite self-consciously actually said at least that they were learning lessons from Yamato Musashi, 16th century samurai, and that they applied these lessons in their daily lives. Do you see a similar phenomenon where the average person, the average business person that an American might be dealing with, say, in the next 10 years, is quite self-conscious of history and sees themselves as sort of part of history in one way or another?
Oh yeah, definitely. There has been a newly founded university called Confucius University. There are lots of private schools that are opened, very often financed by wealthy, well-to-do businessmen for children who get an additional education in calligraphy, in the old arts, in reading the classics. For the students who are actually going to China, for whom this was designed originally, I can highly recommend a series of informative DVDs that you find about China in the library here. A cooperation between the Academy of Social Sciences in Beijing and the Needham Research Institute in Cambridge. And they address certain questions, including the question of education for the future. And they quote, for instance, the head of Haier, the company of which we get all our refrigerators and small household appliances, who engages in educational activities and supporting students to learn traditional values. And they have quite an interesting scene even for the workers in the company who have to destroy so-called Mundi appliances. They try to find the person who has produced this not functioning object, and the person had to destroy it in front of everybody else. So it's a public event, and to make them conscious of the responsibility they have and the ethical value that is embedded in doing what you do as perfectly as possible. So there are all kinds of applications of the old moral sets of values that you find there. No more questions. Thank you very much.